My wife started talking about a close friend at work. He just understands me, she'd say. I trusted her. Until I overheard a late-night call. I can't stop thinking about you. My heart pounded. The next day, I sent her a text from an anonymous number. Does he know about us? When she came home, her hands were shaking. I need to tell you something. I nodded. Yes. You do. I pulled out a chair and placed a letter in front of her. She thought it was a divorce paper. But when she read it, she started crying. Where did you get this? My answer left her speechless. I never thought I'd be writing something like this. I've read these stories before. Some guy finds out his wife is cheating, and suddenly his whole life falls apart. I always thought, that sucks, but that'll never be me. Well. Here I am. It started small. A name. Oh, Jake said the funniest thing today. Jake and I were just talking about that. Jake really gets it. At first, I didn't think much of it. My wife, Sarah, has always been social. She gets along with everyone. She makes friends easily. I told myself it was nothing. Then she started texting more. I'd see her smiling at her phone, fingers moving fast. If I asked, she'd just say, "Oh, it's just work stuff." One night, I walked past her in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, phone tilted away from me. When she saw me, she locked the screen. That was the first time I felt it. That weird feeling in my stomach. I should have said something then. But I trusted her. Things started to change. Sarah was always a morning person, but now she was up even earlier. Taking extra time getting ready. She started wearing perfume again. She hadn't worn perfume to work in years. She started staying late. Ugh, another late meeting. Jake and I have to finish this project. Jake. Again. She started taking her phone everywhere. She used to leave it on the counter. Now it was always in her pocket. Even in the bathroom. Even when she was just stepping outside for a minute. I noticed she wasn't really here anymore. When we talked, she was distracted. I'd say something, and she'd nod, but her eyes were somewhere else. One night, I leaned in to kiss her. She pulled away just slightly. Just enough for me to notice. I should have confronted her then. But I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid. She was my wife. She loved me. Right? Then came the night I woke up to whispers. It was past midnight. I had fallen asleep on the couch. I woke up to the sound of Sarah's voice coming from the kitchen. Soft. Low. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and listened. I know. I miss you too. I felt my stomach drop. I froze. I strained to hear, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I can't stop thinking about you. My hands clenched into fists. I waited for her to say something that would make this not what it sounded like. But she didn't. She just kept talking. I wish we had more time. No, I haven't told him. I don't know if I can. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to march into that kitchen and confront her right then and there. But I didn't. Because suddenly, I knew. If I walked in, she'd lie. She'd say I misunderstood. She'd gaslight me. I needed proof. The next day, I bought a burner phone. I stared at it for a long time before finally typing out a message. Does he know about us? I hit send. Minutes later, my real phone buzzed. It was Sarah. She never called me during work hours. I let it go to voicemail. She texted next. We need to talk. I stared at those 4 words. That was it. That was all I needed to know. I spent the rest of the day sitting on the couch, waiting. My thoughts were a mess. Part of me wanted her to come home and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. That I was wrong. That I was crazy. But I wasn't. I knew it. She knew it. And when she walked in that night, pale and shaking, I could see it written all over her face. I need to tell you something, she whispered. I nodded slowly. Yeah. You do. Then I pulled out a chair. And I placed a letter in front of her. She looked down at it, confused. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Her breath caught. Her face crumbled. Where did you get this? She choked out. I leaned back, watching her. Jake's wife gave it to me. Her mouth fell open. She looked like she was going to be sick. And I sat there, waiting. Waiting for whatever pathetic excuse she was about to give me. Waiting to hear exactly how long she had been lying to my face. Waiting to see if, even now, she would try to save herself. And the worst part? I already knew the answer. She thought it was divorce papers. But when she read it, she started crying. Sarah's hands shook as she stared at the letter. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I could see her brain scrambling for an explanation. For a lie. For a way to twist this into something else. But she couldn't. Because everything was there, in black and white. Jake's wife, Laura, had been suspicious for months. Unlike me, she didn't ignore the signs. She hired a private investigator. And what he found? It wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just texts. It was physical. Hotel receipts. Security footage. Texts that made me want to throw up. I saw the way Sarah's face paled when she got to the part about the hotel. No, she whispered. No, it wasn't like that. I laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound. Not like what? She looked up at me, desperate. It wasn't serious. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. Serious? I repeated. So sleeping with him wasn't serious? She flinched. She knew she was caught. But even now, she was trying to control the damage. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. How long? She didn't answer. Sarah. My voice was deadly calm. How long? Her eyes darted away. She swallowed hard. 6 months. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. 6 months. I had spent half a year sleeping next to her, loving her, planning a future with her, while she was sneaking around with someone else. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Her face crumpled. I swear, I didn't mean for it to happen. I let out a sharp breath. You don't just trip and fall into a hotel bed, Sarah. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was lonely. I stared at her. Lonely? I repeated. I was so angry I could barely see straight. You were lonely, so you decided to screw around behind my back. Instead of talking to me? Instead of telling me something was wrong? She covered her face with her hands. I didn't want to hurt you. I barked out a laugh. Well, congratulations. You did anyway. She sobbed harder. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No sadness. No pain. Just an overwhelming sense of finality. But then she said something that changed everything. Something that made the blood drain from my face. Jake wasn't the only one. I went completely still. What? She shook her head fast, like she regretted saying it. Nothing. I didn't mean, Sarah. My voice was ice. Who else? She was panicking now. It was before Jake. It wasn't, who? She squeezed her eyes shut. It doesn't matter. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. It matters to me. She hesitated, her fingers twisting in her lap. I could see it. The war in her mind. Tell me the truth? Or lie and hope I never find out? After a long silence, she whispered a name. And my stomach dropped. Because I knew him. I knew him very well. My vision blurred. I took a step back, gripping the edge of the table to keep myself steady. I wanted to punch something. You've got to be kidding me. She shook her head, crying harder. I'm sorry, I held up a hand. I needed space. I needed to get away from her before I completely lost it. I turned and walked out the door. She called after me, but I didn't look back. Because if I did, I wasn't sure what I'd do. I drove. I had no destination. I just needed air. But somehow, I ended up in front of his house. I didn't even realize I had been heading there until I pulled into his street. And then I saw him. Sitting on his porch. Drinking a beer. Completely unaware that his world was about to shatter. He looked up when he saw me. Smiled. Hey, man. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. He had no idea. I could end it right here. I could ruin him the way he had ruined me. But as I stood there, staring at him, something in me shifted. This wasn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot. I stood there, staring at the man who had slept with my wife. He had no idea. Not yet. He sipped his beer, watching me curiously. You good? He asked. I nearly laughed. Was I good? No. I was standing in front of him, knowing he had touched my wife, knowing she had whispered his name in the dark just like she had whispered Jake's. I wasn't good. I was about to tear his world apart. You ever lie to your best friend? I asked, voice calm. His eyebrows pulled together. What? I took a slow step forward. Ever sleep with his wife? I watched his face. It happened fast. The confusion. The flicker of guilt. The slight widening of his eyes before he forced himself to look neutral. Too late. I saw it. I knew. Who told you that? His voice was too steady. I felt a dark, ugly satisfaction curl inside me. She did. Silence. Then he laughed. Not loud. Not amused. Just a short, breathy, nervous sound. She's lying, man. You know Sarah. Shut up. I didn't yell it. I didn't have to. He shut up. His jaw clenched. His eyes flicked away. He was guilty. And worse? This wasn't just some guy. This wasn't a random coworker, a stranger, some distant mistake. This was my best friend. How long? I asked. No answer. How long? His Adam's apple bobbed. He ran a hand through his hair. A while. I wanted to break something. I wanted to break him. Was it before or after my wedding? He flinched. And that's when I knew. It wasn't just 6 months. It wasn't just Jake. It had been going on for years. My vision went red. Was I the only one who didn't know? He exhaled, shaking his head. Man, I swear, don't. Swear. To me. I stepped closer. I could smell the beer on his breath. I could see fear in his eyes now. Good. He should be scared. Did Jake know? Another flinch. Jesus. Sarah's been sleeping around this whole time, hasn't she? I said. Not just you. Not just Jake. Who else? He opened his mouth. Closed it. I don't know. Liar. I took another step forward, and he actually took a step back. I almost smiled. Tell me the truth, or I swear to God, okay. He held up his hands. I don't know everyone. But, she told me once that I wasn't the only one. She had others. Before me. After me. My stomach twisted. How many? He shook his head. I don't know. Guess. He hesitated. Then, voice low, at least 4. 4. For that he knew about. Jake. Him. And at least 2 others. Maybe more. I felt sick. All those nights she came home, kissed me, curled into bed beside me, was it after she had been with one of them? Had she looked me in the eye, told me she loved me, while another man was still on her skin? I swallowed hard, my throat burning. Get out of my sight. He hesitated. Man, listen, I stepped forward so fast he stumbled back. I said. Get out. He ran. When I got home, Sarah was sitting on the couch, hugging her knees. She looked up, eyes red and swollen. I thought you weren't coming back, she whispered. I went to see him. Her face collapsed. No, please, I can explain, I know about the others. Dead silence. Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I stepped closer, staring down at her. How many, Sarah? She didn't answer. I leaned down. How many? Tears poured down her face. I don't know. I clenched my jaw. You don't know? She sobbed. It wasn't like that, like what? I snapped. Like cheating? Like lying? Like throwing away everything we built because you wanted to screw half the city? She covered her face. I turned away. I couldn't look at her. I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Silence. Then, voice shaking, if I tell you, will you stay? I turned back slowly. Her lip trembled. Because if I tell you everything, you'll never look at me the same way again. I stared at her. And finally, I said, I don't think I'll ever look at you the same way again anyway. She exhaled shakily. Then she nodded. Okay. And then she told me. And by the time she was done, I realized I had only scratched the surface of how deep this betrayal went. Sarah sat there, her face pale, her hands shaking. Okay, she whispered. You want the truth? I didn't answer. I just watched her. I watched the war on her face. She was deciding how much to give me. How much to hold back. How much she could say while still leaving herself room to escape. I wasn't giving her that option. All of it, I said. Now. She took a deep breath. And then she started talking. And as the words left her mouth, my entire world cracked apart. Jake wasn't the first. My best friend wasn't the first. Sarah had been cheating on me for years. Before we got married. After we got married. She had never stopped. I tried, she choked out. I tried to be good, I swear. Good. Like fidelity was some impossible feat. Like loyalty was something she had to force herself to do. My stomach turned. Who were they? My voice was flat. She hesitated. Does it matter? I exhaled sharply. Does it? I cut myself off before I said something I'd regret. You don't get to decide what matters. Tell me. She swallowed hard. There were, a few. A couple of guys from work. A guy I met at the gym. One was someone I knew before you. I felt something inside me snap. Before me? She nodded, her lip trembling. You were already seeing him when we met, I said slowly. She nodded again. A cold, sick realization settled over me. So when we started dating, I was still seeing him, she admitted. But I ended it after a few months, I swear. I wanted to be with you. I shook my head. It was laughable. Every second of our relationship was built on a lie. I wasn't the only one in the beginning. I wasn't the only one in the middle. And now? I was just another fool she had lied to. I was done. I had sat here and listened to her excuses, her half-truths, her pathetic attempts to downplay what she had done. But I had one last question. Did you ever love me? She froze. Tears filled her eyes. Of course I did. Then why? Her face crumpled. I don't know. I clenched my jaw. That's not good enough. I swear, I don't, not good enough. Her breathing hitched. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed. I laughed because it was all I had left. Sarah, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed me. She burst into sobs. Good. She should cry. I stood up. Her head snapped up in panic. Where are you going? Away from you. She jumped up, reaching for me. Please, just listen, I've listened enough. I turned toward the door. Wait. I didn't. I walked out. And this time, I wasn't coming back. I stayed at a hotel that night. I couldn't step foot in that house. Our house. Because it wasn't ours anymore. It was tainted. It wasn't home. And it never had been. I stared at the ceiling all night, replaying everything in my head. Every smile. Every kiss. Every I love you. Had any of it been real? Had I ever really known the woman I married? Or had I been in love with someone who never even existed? The next day, I met with a lawyer. I wanted out. Fast. Sarah called. She texted. She left voicemails, crying, begging, promising. I ignored every single one. But then came the twist I never saw coming. I was sitting in my car outside the lawyer's office when my phone buzzed. A text. From Jake's wife. Laura. I frowned and opened it. It was a single sentence. Check your email. Now. I did. And what I saw changed everything. It was a forwarded message. An email. From Sarah. Sent to Jake. The day before I found out. The subject line? We need to talk before he finds out. And then, the message, if he knows, we have to stick to the same story. We can't let him find out the truth about the baby. I froze. Baby? What baby? I felt my heart slam against my ribs as I scrolled down. There was another email. From Jake. Are you sure it's mine? I almost threw up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I reread the messages, trying to process it. Sarah had been pregnant. Or she still was. And there was a chance it wasn't mine. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I drove straight home. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, red-eyed, surrounded by tissues. She looked up in shock. I held up my phone. Explain this. Her face drained of color. Are you pregnant? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Then, voice barely above a whisper, yes. Everything inside me shattered. And you don't know if it's mine. Her silence was all the answer I needed. I nodded, stepping back. It hit me all at once. Everything I had lost. My wife. My marriage. And now, even the child I thought might be mine, wasn't. I turned to leave. Sarah sobbed. Please, don't go. I love you. I stopped. And without looking back, I said the only thing I had left to say. No. You don't. And then I walked away. For good. That was 6 months ago. The divorce is almost finalized. Sarah had the baby. A paternity test confirmed what I already knew. Not mine. Jake's. Funny, isn't it? She spent all this time telling me he just understands me, and now? He wants nothing to do with her. She's alone. And me? I'm free. It still hurts. Some nights, I lie awake, wondering how I missed the signs. But I'm learning. I'm healing. And if there's one thing I know for sure, the next time a woman tells me about a close friend at work, I won't be so blind.